Escrow Out Loud is a weekly podcast about San Francisco real estate from the Jackson Fuller team, San Francisco Realtors since 2002. Show notes with links are at jacksonfuller.com.
Hi, Joe.
Hey, Matt. How are you?
I am doing well. So thank you for joining us today. You are a very busy local business person and San Francisco resident. What brought you to San Francisco?
My partner at the time and I lived in New York, and we always loved vacationing in San Francisco. And I was working in an investment bank that got acquired. And so I was bought out of my contract. And 2 weeks later, he got promoted to a job at Adobe that they wanted done from San Jose. So we came out for his job in San Jose.
What year was this?
1998, the height of the .com bubble.
Right, so before it had burst, right? Like this was the first, peak San Francisco real estate experience. What was the first neighborhood you lived in when you moved here?
Midtown Terrace.
And had you looked at neighborhoods or spent much time in the city before arriving, or how did you end up in Midtown Terrace?
We ended up in Midtown Terrace because we had a set of requirements that now that I look back were sort of silly, because we had come from a co-op in New York. So we wanted to have our own house that didn't touch anybody else's house. And there's not many of them in San Francisco. Midtown Terrace offers a really great selection of that.
Every single house in that neighborhood is fully detached. That was one of the selling points when they developed it, yes.
Yeah. But I loved it up there, but you couldn't do anything. When you went home, you were home.
So did you have some particularly obnoxious experiences living in a co-op in New York City that made you emphatic about wanting a single family home that didn't touch, or kind of what
No, it's just that it was loud, because we lived literally it was a big apartment. It was a really beautiful apartment. 9 windows around the corner. The corner, however, was 23rd Street and 8th Avenue. So there were buses on both sides and a subway underneath. And basically, it was never quiet. So we figured we'd have quiet if we had our own house.
You found quiet.
We could hear the electric bus a couple blocks away.
Did you
I am not kidding.
Complaint about that electric bus?
I am not kidding. Like, the next door neighbors asked us to make the noise less from our hot tub when it turned the filter on at 6 a.m. It was too loud.
So did you enjoy Midtown Terrace?
I did. We liked it a lot. We were I was living there and working down in San Jose for a lot of the time. So it was great back when you could commute to San Jose without spending 2 hours. It was about 55 minutes. It was 55 minutes each way. And it really worked well for us.
So when you were planning to move to San Francisco, as a gay man, did you want to live in the Castro at all? Like, did it attract you or disattract you, or you were indifferent?
Well, we would have loved it, but even then it was more than we wanted to spend.
So it was more about like having the property type you wanted than
Right.
the location.
Right.
Okay.
Which I've since changed my mind about that. I think location is more important, but back then property type was more important.
So, and you've lived in a couple neighborhoods over the years. Do you have a favorite that you lived in?
I think right now I'm living in Duboce Triangle, and this is my favorite because you're close enough to go out to commercial zones like the Castro or the Mission or the Lower Haight, but you're not living in it.
So, and you gave up a car to live in Duboce Triangle.
I did.
And this is how is that? How is life in San Francisco without a car in 2019?
Except for grocery shopping, which I just don't want to look like the old man with the cart. So I will not buy a cart. So except for grocery shopping, I love it. I mean, I thought I would be taking 10 lifts a month was my estimate, and I might do 4. So I really don't spend as much on lifts as I thought I would spend.
Do you find yourself walking more?
I walk so much more. My health app on my iPhone loves me. Most days I'm doing at least 3.5 miles.
Well done. Yeah. So what's different and what's the same about San Francisco since you arrived in 98?
Well, I'm not sure if it's different or if it's that I'm walking more, but the pathos of how awful it is for the homeless is just, it's heartbreaking. It's literally staggering. There's people, and when I make eye contact with them, I feel so bad because there's nowhere for them to go. There's no toilet. There's no place, nothing. And so they set up and they're obnoxious, So I don't like them, but I feel bad for them. It's the typical, like, what do you do about this? It's gross.
And I mean, as long as I've been in San Francisco, which is a little bit shorter than you, we've always had a homeless problem. But I would agree that like this somehow feels different, and I don't know if it's just density or after 20 years of listening to politicians say, hope is right around the corner, and we're like, never turning that corner.
Right.
So is that different or the same?
Well, I'm not sure if it seems worse,
yeah.
But I think it might seem worse because I'm in it more.
Gotcha.
So I'm not exactly sure.
So are there any things about San Francisco that haven't changed that you're glad haven't changed?
Yeah, people are more human to each other here. Like, we're not always nice to people, but people are generally nicer here. Nicer might be the wrong word, but they take time for other people in a way that I don't find in a lot of other places. And the gay guys are definitely nicer to each other here than any place I've ever lived. So,
is there anything that's left San Francisco that you miss, like a building, a shop, a store, whatever it might be?
You're going to have to edit this out. Sex clubs.
Why do I have to edit that out?
Literally everything's closing. And so all the alternative things that made being here as a gay man have started to disappear. Not sort of. It has started to disappear. And it's becoming like what happened to New York under Giuliani. Everything just became bland.
The Disneyification of the Castro, right?
Exactly.
Is it a neighborhood that tells a story about gay men and civil rights, or is it a theme park where everything is rainbow colored with flags? And to the same extent, south of Market used to be leather bars and sex clubs, and now they're getting a park.
Parklet, really.
Which I think is great.
It's wonderful.
But I still don't understand what you're supposed to do at the leather park.
Well, I think a lot of times we don't understand what the city's doing until it's done. And we're like, oh, this is really nice. I'm
sure it will be a lovely space, but
once
how that space ties anyway.
Yeah. And, well, the fact that people who bought condos in new buildings that were built long after all these nightclubs were there have been able to shut down nightclubs because of the noise. It's like people, they were there first. You don't get to move in next door to a nightclub and say, this is too loud. But they do.
But they do.
They do here. Yeah.
So you live in the city, obviously, and you own a business in the city.
Yes.
So what do you do?
I'm a barber. So I have Joe's Barbershop right on Market between Church and Sanchez.
And how long has that been a going concern now?
It will be 15 years old on September 10th this year.
Congratulations. 15 years. 15 years as a small business person in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. What's that like?
It's improving. It's improving. And unfortunately, it seems to always improve right after I go through whatever administrative hell there is to experience. When I opened my first location, I got stuck for 6 months because there was another permit tied up in the same building. So they froze all permits in that building. Great. And then at this location, I got hit with an $8,000 fee for water. Now, mind you, it wasn't
like they were dropping off water.
It wasn't like they were giving me a meter even. I share a meter with the building. Or it wasn't like I was going to use a lot of water because they could only classify me as a hair salon. And so businesses pay up front for the improvement that we all have bonds on, to the improvement to the Hetch Hetchy water system. And I'm like, but I'm a barbershop. We hardly wash 10 heads of hair a week compared to a hair salon, which is using water all the time. Well, that's the only classification we have, so you have to pay it. It's like, okay, well, they fixed that. But not until after I paid. I only had to pay $4,000 some, $4,800 or something. It's such a deal. Such a deal. But they only fix it after I go through the hell,
So your shop is on Market Street, Upper Market.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk in the city right now about retail vacancy and kind of, just the American trend of retail apocalypse. Mm-hmm. As a business owner and someone who lives in the city, how do you approach that? Or what do you think the city should be doing? Or how do we kind of keep these spaces active?
Well, I'm really lucky because my business landlord is a businessman who cares about where he is my impression. And while the rent is high, he's not giving me increases that would put me out of business, like some of these businesses. But sometimes I hear about, I forget what bar it was, but they were all up in arms because they had a 300% rent increase. It's like, okay, what's the new rent? They're like, it's $9,000 a month. And I'm like, you have a bar, and if you can't pay $9,000 a month in rent, you don't deserve to belong in business. And
mark up the drinks and water them down.
What profit are you taking? That's nothing. They were paying $3,000 a month, and they're upset. It's like, well, it's a big space. So it's like sometimes we stick with details that don't really accurately reflect. But a lot of the empty spaces here The Harvest Market, I think, is $42,000 a month they want for that space. I don't know how anybody can be in business paying $42,000 a month rent.
That's one of these interesting disconnects is as the price of residential real estate skyrockets, right, all of these buildings want very high-end retail tenants. Right. But it's not like there's luxury aspirin or, luxury basics, right? I mean, we all just need some basic market, basic this, basic that, and how many coffee shops and, kind of like all of the interesting boutique-y things that, look great in renderings. How many do you really need in a neighborhood, especially when everyone buys most things online at the moment, especially, in the city or has them delivered. Do you think San Francisco has a housing crisis?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I moved away for just a year and now I'm back and I was trying to find a place to buy and it's mind-boggling expensive. And our insistence on low density housing and no vertical growth is the reason. Like, I believe everywhere there's a train, so Market Street, out the L, out the N, the K and the M, everywhere there's a train, we should have at least 10-story apartment buildings lining the path, or definitely by every stop. We should have high density by every stop. Then we would have more trains because we would have more people and they could support more trains because there's certainly no parking. So if we have to depend on trains, we should have super high density all along the train route. And if we did that, I think you could get a 2-bedroom apartment for $1 million, not $1.6 million. So
the city's, definitely trying to put a lot more density around transit, but every neighborhood in San Francisco seems to think the best place to build something is the other person's neighborhood. Right. Any thoughts about that? Do you just come in as a city and you're like, hey, look, these are the rules? Or, how do you balance that?
I think it's the Scott Wiener that's sort of moving legislatively to pass a bill in Sacramento saying neighborhoods can't do that.
He's been working very hard on that at a variety of approaches, particularly around transit and density, and saying that, if you're within, a quarter or a half mile, you just have to, as of right, allow X zoning for, such dense, building, not up to 10 stories, right? You couldn't get that far. But that's only like within, like approximately that distance to the station. So it's not like all along those transit routes. But he's actually been a great advocate at the state level for building more housing. Right. And making sense
and make it near transit.
Yeah, because to your point, there's no more room for parking in cars. There's
no more room.
It's just misery.
Yeah.
So has the experience of buying and selling real estate changed in like the decades that you've been doing it in the city?
Not really. It was crazy when we got here in 98. We bid 30% over asking for the house we got.
In 1998?
In 1998. 30%. Like, mind you, that 30% was much lower, but still.
Coming from the East Coast where you didn't pay 30% over
coming from the East Coast where they tell you this is the price, and you either buy it at that price or you do a little negotiating, but you don't do 30% negotiating, and you don't offer more than they're asking. I think they might do that in New York now, but it's certainly not when we did it.
Yeah.
It's like, they said, this is what it costs. We said, great, we'll take it. It was done.
Multiple offers over asking as far back as, 20 plus years. Yeah. So that is a story. Any other thoughts about San Francisco real estate? San Francisco? It's your soapbox.
I think we need to go for more density along train routes. I'll just repeat myself. Anywhere there's transit, we should have more density.
I'm with you there.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us. And this has been great.
Excellent. Good luck.
Escrow Out Loud is a weekly podcast about San Francisco real estate from the Jackson Fuller team, San Francisco Realtors since 2002. Show notes with links are at jacksonfuller.com.